Hello and welcome to the Horror Homestead. My name is GiBi, and we're going to be reacting to the newest game theory video today. Are the FNAF books actually canon? Yeah, this is going to be a rough one. What we're going to do is we're going to watch the video, we're going to pause it, we're going to talk about it, we're going to react to it. Now, before I do anything like that, I obviously always like giving my context, my current theories and beliefs before we start talking about the video, because I want you guys to know what my biases are, what my assumptions are, what I'm looking for in a piece of evidence that should be in existence to convince me and thus you guys, because you're the audience. So I want to talk about the books. And right now, my opinion on the Tales books is that I don't have one. I have no opinion one way or the other if the Tales books are in continuity with the games. Now, I do feel like I need to explain what I mean when I say in continuity or canon. What I mean is that the books, literally what happens in the books, happens in the games. If you make a timeline of the things that happen, you would have something like FNAF 6, and then one of the Tales from the Pizzaplex stories, and then a Help Wanted, and then a Tales from the Pizzaplex story, and then Security Breach. They fit into the continuity the same way that if you're watching Star Wars, you would start with The Phantom Menace, and then Attack of the Clones, and then the Clone Wars TV show, and then Revenge of the Sith. It squishes itself right on in there in the same continuity. It's a multimedia continuity. The books happen in the games. That's what I'm looking for, and that's what I say when I mean canon or continuity. Unfortunately, because FNAF is FNAF, and Scott has had bad experiences in the past talking about what is and isn't canon, he's decided to just not tell us if it's canon or not. And the thing is, one of the things that I think causes problems is that people have different levels of standard for what is considered canon, and also different definitions of what is canon or not. For example, Game Theory's video right here, are the FNAF books actually canon? I think the safest answer, and honestly the most likely answer in my opinion, to take away from this scenario is to say, the books can be looked at for clues. Something that happens in the book is probably likely something that also happens in the game, but we can't be 100% sure if they're canon. My current opinion, and I talk about this for a very long time in my video about this topic, is that there is nowhere near enough evidence or confirmation to come to a conclusion. I personally think it is extremely irrational to think that the evidence we currently have points one way or the other. There are similar things to the books that are now in the games, but there's also things in the games that contradict the things in the books. I don't think either one of these nebulous balls of things, there's a tiger rock in the book and the game, so it's canon. Oh, there's a tree in the book but not in the game, so it's not canon. I don't think that tells us either way what's going on. With that said, that does not mean that the most likely thing is that there are some similarities. It literally means we don't know one way or the other. I'm not saying, it's this nice, beautiful mixture of both that everyone can agree with. I literally mean we don't know. I really want to talk about this for a second because it's very fortuitous. The white balance on my screen just got totally messed up. A few days before the reveal of the Tiger Rock plush for the Help Wanted 2 update, I just so happened to ask a poll on YouTube asking people their opinion on if the books are canon. At that time, 60% of people said that neither Frights nor Tales are canon, and only 22% of people said that Tales were canon. A few days later, after the reveal of the Tiger Rock plush, after the Help Wanted 2 update, when people started releasing videos saying, the books are canon in the games, I asked the exact same question, worded the exact same way, and got the exact same number of replies. And now we see 50% of people thinks that Tales is canon, compared to the 33% who now don't think that either series is canon. And now, about a month later, I asked the same question again. Now this poll is only from a couple hours ago, and it only has about 1/3 the number of responses as the other two polls. But the numbers have gone down significantly back to their original levels before the Tiger Rock plush revealed. We have 40% of people thinking Tales is canon, and 50% of people who think neither is. And this is completely understandable. We had a baseline of people who believed something. We had new evidence that came out that seemed to back up one of those positions, and so the people who believed that went up. And then as time passed and people settled into a new understanding of what's going on, and people put out videos saying, actually, this doesn't mean it's canon, that number went back down. It didn't settle at the exact same spot that it was before the Tiger Rock plush, but it's certainly not as drastic or serious as it was the days around when that originally happened. The loud masses screaming that the books are canon now have faded, and about half of them have gone back to thinking that the books aren't canon. So what I'm kind of worried about is after this Game Theory video, Game Theory obviously being the most popular FNAF channel, what I'm worried about is that people are now going to come away and just agree mindlessly with whatever is said in this video. So I'm very scared about what's going to be said, because I am, again, very much in the camp that we do not have enough evidence to say one way or the other, and thus any other conclusion, the conclusion that the games and the books are in the same continuity or the one that they aren't, we shouldn't come to either of those, because I don't think that we have evidence Like, even with the Silver Eyes, when Scott came out and said, these aren't canon, don't look for clues in them, he put clues in them. That's how we got William Afton's name. That's how we got Molten MCI. There are clues in the series that Scott said isn't canon and not to look for clues in. So if he didn't say that Frights and Tales aren't canon and didn't say not to look for clues in them, of course we can look for clues in them. Of course Edwin and Dave might exist. Of course the Tiger Rock might exist. Now we know it does. Of course the Mimic might exist, and now we know it does. That doesn't mean that the books are canon, and that's kind of the thing I always want to drive home. Just because there's similarities, which I will never pronounce right, just because there's similarities between the different continuities does not mean that they're one-to-one. And I think that when people say canon or continuity, and definitely when I say canon or continuity, what I mean is one-to-one. These fit in seamlessly. And I think that is a much harder threshold to prove than not canon. Because if it's only 99% the same, then it's not canon. It's not in the same continuity. But there's enough stalling. We're now going to listen to what Tom has to say about if the books are canon. I hope that they really thought about this before making this video. Alright, and again, my usual style is that I will always pause the video while it's playing. We're going to pause and talk. We're pause and talkers here. Let's go.
FNAF books were canon. It's a question that's torn the fanbase apart for...
That is literally accurate. Torn apart is happening. I think that's the only thing that people, were there to be a FNAF meetup in real life, would cause physical violence, is if the books are canon.
An update to Help Wanted 2 that seems to be telling us the answer is yes. But what would that change? What theories would this ruin? And what does it mean we can expect from Secret of the Mimic this year? Today, we're going to find out.
Just based on that intro, I'm guessing they're going to say that it is canon and then go into all those consequences of it being canon, but keeping my fingers crossed that they don't say that.
FNAF from a new perspective. You may remember that last time I was getting a little frustrated with Scott and his lack of clarity in this franchise. It is fun to be able to solve these small loose threads, but we're still unable to use those to figure out the bigger mysteries. What's the deal with Gregory? What happened to Cassie?
Well, okay, I disagree with that. Obviously, whatever the deal with Gregory and what happened to Cassie are going to be things that are answered in the next game. Not maybe Secret of the Mimic, but like the next follow-up game. Their story's not over yet. What I think frustrates people is asking questions that aren't dealing with the current continuity, right? Like, who did the bite of 87? That's never going to come up in the next game, but the fate of Cassie and Gregory is. I think that's a very silly thing to be hung up on. But we're still unable to use those to figure out the bigger mysteries. What's the deal with Gregory? What happened to Cassie? Are the books canon? Well, it appears big question.
And now he's
I don't think that's the case.
We just got ourselves a couple of new pieces of information to answer the biggest question in the franchise's recent history. Are the books
But are they answers?
Recently, friend of the channel Dorco did a charity live stream.
So they're going to talk about the 5 Laps at Freddy's thing, where on a billboard it says Edwin Murray Co., and there's a picture of the vacuum that he invented in the books. And I think that that's really bad evidence for 2 reasons. One is that Edwin can be in the games, and the books still might not be canon. That just literally is not evidence for the books being canon. And 2, who knows what 5 Laps at Freddy's even is, and whether we should take it seriously or not. Like, all of Scott's other, like, I'm gonna say mini games, like the troll games he's put out, we understand that those aren't literally supposed to happen anywhere in the continuity. We understand that they're, like, little special side games, celebrations of the franchise. No one's looking at Super Smash Bros. For lore about Zelda, because that's not how it works. So I don't think 5 Laps at Freddy's could be used for anything.
Unreleased gameplay and teasers. One was a new version of 5 Laps at Freddy's, the weird spin-off kart racer thing. And while playing, a new billboard was discovered. It was advertising a company called Murray Co. and their brand new robotic vacuum cleaner. In the story The Mimic from Tales from the Pizzaplex, we have a character called Edwin Murray who builds a robotic vacuum cleaner. He later goes on to be bought by Fazbear Entertainment and builds the Mimic, the big bad that we saw at the end of Ruin. We also got a very short teaser for a Help Wanted 2 update where we get to see the Mimic.
And in the Silver Eyes trilogy, we have a character named Henry Emily who built a lot of the animatronics and would later go on to appear in the games after his appearance in the books, but that didn't make the Silver Eyes canon, now it did it.
Its costume model up close. But the important detail was actually in the very corner of the screen, a white tiger plushie with different colored eyes. In that same story, The Mimic, Edwin's son David has a white tiger plushie, and after he dies, the Mimic begins.
It's because he ran out in the road. There was a car.
Like Tiger Rock and Storyteller, the Mimic is heavily associated with a white tiger animatronic with two different colored eyes. A couple of days after all of this, the update came out, and it became even more clear that this was all to do with the Mimic. The tiger plushie was unlocked by using the code 1979,
which is from the trailer.
The Secret of the Mimic trailer, and roughly around the time Edwin created the Mimic in the books. We get to see the toy factory that people reported the Secret of the Mimic demo from PAX West taking place in, and in the Mimic story, we learn that Edwin lived in a factory where he was making animatronics. As you might imagine, this set the fan base ablaze because it seemed like the games were finally confirming the canonicity of the books. Before this, the strongest connection we had to the Tales books taking place in the game timeline was just the Mimic existing down in the FNAF 6 building.
And nothing has changed
in both the epilogues of Tales and the ending of Ruin. But now, with Edwin's company existing and a white tiger character who we've only ever seen in the books at this point, it feels like more than ever we are being shown that the games and the books may coexist.
Again, I cannot state this clear enough. When the Silver Eyes came out, we were introduced to the character of Henry in the books. We also learned William Afton's name in the books. We also saw Golden Freddy say, "It's me" in the book, which had previously happened in the game. So then in the games, when we learned William Afton's name is also William Afton, we don't say, "Oh my gosh, It's Me" was in both continuities, and now William's in both continuities. Maybe Henry will be in both continuities? And then he was. So then when Henry was in both continuities, did we stop and say, oh, I guess the books are games canon? No, because that's not how it works. It doesn't matter that the Mimic was canon. It doesn't matter that the Tiger Plush was canon. It doesn't matter that Edwin is canon. That doesn't tell us literally anything, and I don't know why so many people, including now, I guess, Game Theory, is saying it is. I get so, frustrated by this because it doesn't work like that in any other franchise, in any other fandom. There can be crossover between continuities without them being canon to each other. It's happened in this very franchise, and that doesn't make them canon to each other. The only argument that, I understand is, if the books aren't games canon, why would they reveal the information to us like this? Why would they tease the Tiger Rock plush if they didn't know that we knew what the Tiger Rock plush meant in the books canon? I get that. It makes sense, assuming that the puzzle maker would make a puzzle that is coherent and wouldn't mislead us. In my opinion, the only evidence that the books are games canon is that it would be a bad puzzle on behalf of Steelwool if they weren't. Yeah, that's not very convincing.
In the same universe. But if that's the case, what does that change? We've been theorizing about this franchise for a long time now, and we've never really considered the books to be canon to the game timeline.
But they have used them as evidence for things, both Tales, and I actually think they may use Tales too much to rely on lore and stuff. MatPat did at the very least. And the Silver Eyes, you look at both of those for evidence and lore.
So, if the books are now being shown as canon, I wondered what dominoes begin to fall. Which of those theories get debunked? What parts of the story would we have a new perspective on? And what could that mean for future releases? Better grab your Vanny masks once again, theorists, because we've got to take a look at FNAF in a whole new way and ask the question, what if the books were canon? Let's start with the series of books that are most tied to this modern era of FNAF, Tales from the Pizzaplex. In case you don't know, this is a series of 8 books, each containing 3 short stories and an epilogue, with all the epilogues combining into one continuous story across all 8 books. That gives us 25 full stories, all of which take place in a world where Freddy Fazbear's exists. Most commonly, it's some version of the Pizzaplex. You may have seen the term Tales games thrown around when talking about whether the books are canon to the games. Well, this is where that comes from. Tales games boils down to these 25 Tales stories being completely one-to-one canon to the game.
I'm glad you specified one-to-one canon there.
Fortunately, you don't need to know all 25 stories inside and out in order to get to grips with how Tales would change the game's lore. There are a few stories that make small changes, but mostly it's just to provide clarity on parts of the story we weren't sure about. Stories like Help Wanted, where we learn about Steve Snodgrass, a game developer who made the original 4 FNAF games for Fazbear Entertainment. Though we find out he's making them based purely on the rumors surrounding the business and his own memories. Plus, his mind is being affected by this little high-pitched noise.
which would bring illusion discs from the Silver Eyes into the game's continuity for the first time. Those literally were not in the games. Even when people say, like, oh, Sister Location has whatever, nightmare gas, the gas isn't the same as illusion discs. So this would be bringing those in from the Silver Eyes continuity, which is kind of weird. I'm also fairly certain that one of the Tales from the Pizzaplex books mentions that FNAF 6 is a game as well, that, like, Pizza Sim is a game, which is very odd and I think doesn't fit with a lot of other canon game stuff. Like, we know that Steve only made the first 3 or 4 FNAF games in universe in Help Wanted, right? It was 3 and then part of 4. So where did 6 come from? Where did Pizza Sim come from? I don't know. Why is there an arcade machine in Security Breach that has characters from the Silver Eyes on it? That's kind of weird. Theodore, Charlie's little bunny friend, that's a weird inclusion into Security Breach. I don't know, guys.
Distorting the reality around him, and it's all coming from one little disc. If the books are canon, then this story would not only confirm the canon existence of sound illusion discs, everyone's favorite FNAF gadget, but it would also 100% confirm that canonically, the first 3 to 4 games are in-universe games.
Okay, so I slightly disagree with this. The games from, like, Help Wanted the game tells us that there were indie games that were created that were, like, loose interpretations of the things that really happened. And then the Help Wanted VR experience is based on those games. That does not mean that the games we play, FNAF 1 through 4, are the in-universe games. It just means that there are in-universe games that are similar to the games that we played. I don't know. It's like they're taking 2 opposite approaches at once, saying that, oh, Tales books are literally canon, but the games aren't. That is so weird to me. Those seemed like opposite people would believe those 2 things as true.
Since the Help Wanted game.
Fazbear Entertainment hired the game developer. Those indie games were designed to conceal and make light of what happened. This isn't just an attempt to rebrand. It's an elaborate cover-up.
But what this changes is the reliability of those games for lore purposes.
I disagree. I think the games we played still really happened, but there are in-universe games that are similar to the games that we played.
After the Help Wanted game, despite being told that these were in-universe games, it was unclear how one-to-one they were with reality. This story tells us that they were being made by someone who didn't know the true stories and whose mind was slowly being worn down. This allows for Scott and Steelwool to retcon certain details from those games without them really being retcons. They're just something Steve made up. Obviously, if a modern entry confirms a detail from FNAF 1 to 4, then we can be sure it's likely true. And we actually get a good example of this. Ditophobia. This was the final story from Tales from the Pizzaplex, and it involves a character named Rory, living in a house that is described exactly like the FNAF 4 house. Rory believes he is a kid with a family, but...
I don't mean to interrupt him. I just think it's so weird that given that, like, I'm getting the exact same information that they got when they wrote this video. And my takeaway is FNAF 4 is canon, Rory's story is like an in-universe tale. Their takeaway is that Rory's story is canon, but the FNAF 4 game is an in-universe game? Like, why would you come to that conclusion? That is just so weird to me. Especially, like, so you're saying that the Tiger Rock plush existing in the games means that that story is canon, but not that FNAF 4 existing in the game means that FNAF 4 is canon? It just really seems backward. I don't understand this conclusion.
As time goes on,
that does not mean I think you're dumb if you came to the same conclusion as them. It just means I don't understand
it's
it.
revealed he's not a kid. He's grown up. The house is disgusting, and the entire place has been filled with a hallucinogenic gas coming from the underground bunker. Circus babies. We've wondered for a long time what was causing the nightmares in FNAF 4, whether it was sound illusion discs or just the overwhelming sense of fear and guilt. But if these books are canon, the answer becomes clear. The nightmares are real, but it's the hallucinogenic gas that truly brings them to life. So that's hallucinogenic gas, sound illusion discs, and don't forget we have VR and AR in this world. There are 3 reality-altering tools on the table for this franchise. Basically, we can't trust anything we see in the games anymore. Then there's the more modern stories like GiBi. This one focuses on a kid named Greg that is hacking into the Pizzaplex animatronics, leaving high scores in all the arcade machines, and is getting rid of any counselors or anyone else that gets too close to the truth. With his arcade and hacking sign-offs being GGY, it's almost certain that his full name is Gregory, as in our Gregory from Security Breach, which also makes Gregory Patient 46, the mysterious child from the therapy CDs we collect during Security Breach that also has a habit of getting rid of therapists. The final point of clarity here is that Greg refers to himself as the wizard's favorite apprentice during the story, as well as using the handle Dr. Rabbit, which feels like a mighty big hint that Gregory is working for Glitchtrap, just like Vanessa. To be fair, we've actually been on board with this idea for a while, so it hasn't really changed any of our theories. But if the books are canon, it just solidifies it more as fact rather than theory. The only thing we have to wonder now is whether he's still under Glitchtrap's control. Help Wanted 2 and
So the interesting thing about the GGY story is from like a real world, or I guess you could say a meta perspective, is the question of why would Scott/Steelwool choose to reveal this information to us in a book and either not in Security Breach or not save it for a sequel to Security Breach? It seems like Gregory was like evil the whole time. Here's his entire backstory. Should either be something that's explained in the game, or, oh, the game was rushed and COVID happened and there was miscommunications with Scott. Okay, then that should be in Ruin, or that should be in a different game. The backstory of the main character shouldn't, if the books are canon, if this is a multimedia franchise, the same as like Star Wars, right? There's books and games and movies and whatever, TV shows. Important lore like that should be in the main method of telling the story, which in FNAF's case is the games. I think it's a really bad storytelling decision to have that be in the books. Now, do I think that the book is telling the truth? Do I think that Gregory's GGY is Patient 46? Probably, but I think the games should still have that reveal coming in a future game. And when the games do reveal that to us, it should be like in a way that is satisfying for us, the people who've only played the games, to learn, and not expect that you've just read the book already that tells you all the answers. Continuing.
Which seem to be telling us that Vanessa is now free of Glitchtrap, and in
Yes.
Ruin, they are implied to be working together to help
Yes.
Cassie. So is Gregory also free now, or is he
I would
just
think so.
playing the long con? As I said, those three stories don't really change much about the lore. They provide some clarity and add depth to certain lore aspects.
Whoa, I think Dittophobia changes everything about the lore. If FNAF 4 isn't being experienced by either Mike or the Crying Child, it's just some random kid named Rory, I think that changes. That's probably the biggest change in like any of these stories as far as the lore is concerned.
That were otherwise just dropped on us with no real explanation. But it doesn't really derail anything. However,
again, I
that
disagree.
isn't the case for every story. And now we have to talk about the big three: the Mimic, the Storyteller, and the Epilogues. And if these stories are canon, it causes a drastic shift in how we look at this modern era of FNAF.
Does
A
it?
quick recap for those who don't know. These stories focus around the latest big bad of the series, the Mimic. It starts with Edwin Murray and his son.
What do these stories tell us that like we wouldn't already get from the game? Like, okay, the Mimic exists. There were animatronics before Freddy's, like 1979, like that date. What's in the stories that drastically conflicts with the games? I don't think
Edwin
anything.
is a robotics genius whose company was bought by Fazbear Entertainment, and his job was to turn the original Freddy's costumes into animatronics. He ends up building the Mimic out of spare parts, and it's designed to mimic and play with his son. Sadly though, one day his son runs out of the factory into the road and is hit by a car. Even after he dies, the Mimic...
You could have said he was running out on the road. Come on. All of the FNAF theorists, we're all in agreement. Jackie's box is canon.
Beat the Mimic to a metallic pulp. Edwin then disappears, leaving Fazbear to come and collect their property from Edwin's factory, where the Mimic begins violently murdering those who come to collect. They do eventually manage to contain the Mimic, as while they begin construction of the pizzaplex on top of the FNAF 6 location, a version of the Mimic is dropped off alongside other animatronics that will make up the glam rock band. The Mimic is then programmed to help clear the endos that remain inside, ripping their arms and heads off. But it doesn't just stop at the endos. Construction workers begin being torn apart limb from limb, leading to the location being cemented over, trapping it inside the FNAF 6 location beneath the pizzaplex. Many years later, once the pizzaplex is up and running, the Mimic software is used to run something called the Storyteller, a baobab tree that connects the entire pizzaplex, and it's designed to create new fun storylines for the characters to play out, except it ends up turning the animatronics into more childish and more dangerous versions of themselves. At this point, Edwin returns and tries to stop the Mimic, only to die in the process, with the Storyteller later being removed, but the Mimic program remains. There is a lot to unpack there.
How does that contradict any of the lore? That explains the lore. That gives us a lot of background into what's going on in Security Breach, which obviously very much needed it because of the aforementioned being rushed and not really being in contact with Scott the entire time for like what's actually going on. What does that change about what we understand? He went into this like, this will change everything. It just explains things. What are you even talking about, Tom?
Theories that go out the window if these books do end up being
What
canon.
theories?
The first and most obvious one, the origins of the Mimic. Up until this point, we've been theorizing that Edwin was meant to be a parallel for Henry.
He could be. Keep in mind, again, I'm coming from this from the perspective of I've never said that Edwin is a parallel for Henry. I know that, I guess, Game Theory and John FNAF have said that. This doesn't technically change that. Like, I don't understand why seeing the tiger plush in the games tells us that this still can't be the case. That's the step that I'm missing here, Mr. Game Theory, is why is that compelling enough evidence? In my opinion, that's like, the Mimic existing wasn't compelling enough evidence, but the tiger plush is? Like, what?
Early days of Fazbear, we even theorized that Henry had been bought out by Afton, much like Edwin was. Both made the earliest animatronics, and both had young children that died, and they took their agony out on their animatronic creations that were designed to mimic their now deceased child.
Now, what he just said, that comes from the Silver Eyes version of Henry, not the game's continuity version of Henry.
That led to several theories about how Henry originally created the Mimic, and that it was originally made to be part of their traveling circus alongside Henry and William. But if the books are canon, that cannot be the case, as it's very clearly Edwin that created the Mimic. Now, that's not to say the Mimic couldn't have been used as part of the circus. We see Jackie from Secret of the Mimic is very much circus-themed, but it just wasn't the reason it was created. Instead, that would have just been a retroactive use for it. We also had a theory about how the Mimic had been locked underground for a very...
Okay, so I guess what he's more saying is that this disproves previous Game Theory episodes. That makes more sense, because again, they have to make this content for like the audience that's really only watching Game Theory and paying attention to them. So okay, you know what? I take back a little bit of my exasperation. Yes, it disproves your prior theory, but it doesn't disprove the general community consensus that Henry was a parallel, or is a parallel to Edwin.
Very long.
Or it does, but there's just not enough. It does if the books are games canon, but there's no evidence that the books are games canon.
Time, at least since the 1980s. After Henry disappeared, Afton went to collect what belonged to Fazbear, including the Mimic, and then used it to help create the Funtime animatronics, only for it to all go wrong.
Where is this coming from? Excuse me? The only thing we know about the Mimic is it was sped away in the Mexis van. What are you talking about?
Retroactive use for
it.
We also had a theory about how the Mimic had been locked.
Oh, this is their theory. Okay, I was about to say, what are you talking about?
For a very long time, at least since the 1980s. After Henry disappeared, Afton went to collect what belonged to Fazbear, including the Mimic, and then used it to help create the Funtime animatronics, only for it to all go wrong and for it to kill.
That's a really weird conclusion, because if you did think that Edwin is a parallel to like Henry from the Silver Eyes, William doesn't make the Funtimes out of adult Charlie in those games, in the Silver Eyes books. He makes it out of the original animatronics, which is Molten MCI, which is what I think a lot of people in the community believe. That's just a very odd step to get from point A to point B there.
His daughter. He then locked the Mimic underground and created a Blue Bunny Mixes to keep it locked away.
William made Mixes as their theory?
This theory cannot be true, as the Mimic doesn't arrive at the pizzaplex until construction on the pizzaplex has already begun.
Never mind, that's why.
There is still a chance that the Mimic was used by Afton to create the Funtimes, as they go to collect the Mimic just a few months after its creation sometime in the 70s, way before Afton's own spring locking. It just means that Elizabeth's death wasn't enough to make Afton go, maybe this isn't such a good idea, which I would say feels strange, but then again, this is the guy who tortured his own son with nightmare animatronics, so it...
I thought he tortured Rory with nightmare animatronics. What? I'm so confused right now. Excuse me?
And turns out it's
Mr. Burrows, right?
Relevant character like Mrs. Afton, like we theorized about in our FNAF timeline.
But hold on.
Let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see my updated version of this. Anyway, instead, it's a random businessman called Mr. Burrow.
Okay, but I'm sure they're about to say this. Burrows is very rabbit related, so why are we assuming this isn't like an Afton or a robot that's like controlled by an Afton? Ooh, like...
And it turns out the reason the Pizzaplex was built on top of FNAF 6 and the reason the Mimic was given access to the Pizzaplex systems wasn't for some big master plan with Afton's old computer chips and
it could be.
Corpse. It was just a
for money saving
move made by someone who knew nothing about anything.
We're told they know nothing about anything. Their name is Burrows. They're probably controlled by Afton. Come on!
That you might expect from a modern CEO, profits. And because Mr. Burrow dies alongside Edwin after installing the storyteller, which has clearly been removed by the time of security breach, that would imply that the messages we saw about Vanessa's hiring, despite her lack of qualifications, were almost certainly the Mimic's doing. Vanessa was possessed by the Mimic, aka Glitch Trap, and with Mr. Burrows dead, the Mimic had full control of Fazbear's systems, including...
I think he probably had full control even before Mr. Burrows died.
So when it says that her recommendation came from the top, it was likely the Mimic using Mr. Burrows' email to put its plan into motion. But what is the Mimic's plan? Well, at this point, it's just software. If it truly wants to continue Afton's legacy, it's going to need a body, and it has one just beneath the pizzaplex. But this is where one of the big criticisms of the books being canon comes from. While there is clearly a Mimic under the pizzaplex in the games, it doesn't appear to be the Mimic 2 that we read about in the epilogues. In the epilogues, it's a black, almost gooey, spider-like thing.
Long black cables dropped from the open trapdoor and trailed through the apartment. The cables looked like tentacles, as if a giant black squid was slithering down from the ceiling to find Abe. Are we assuming that so I do think this. I do think that probably everything in the pizzaplex and surrounding entities are controlled by the Mimic program. That would mean that every single wire, every single screen in the pizzaplex is the Mimic, right? It would mean that the VIP pig is the Mimic, which, again, I think that's a reasonable conclusion to draw from this AI era of the story being told. That doesn't mean it looks like long black cables with tentacles and a black squid. That just means it's capable of controlling something that looks like tentacles or long black cables or a black squid, etc. Also, Abe is from the Bobby Dots story, so that would be more like saying that, like, the Bobby Dots are the Mimic, which, again, that seems reasonable. That is something I'd believe, but that doesn't mean that it's what the Mimic is. Like, Glitch Trap is probably the Mimic, right? And the VIP Pig is probably the Mimic, and I guess the Bobby Dots are probably the Mimic, right? Like, these are, like, characters that the overall AI is in control of. You know what I think would be a really helpful explanation right now is to bring up the Amazing Digital Circus. You have the character Kane, who's, like, the god of that world and controls everything, except for, like, the player characters, maybe, although who knows, maybe some of them can be NPCs, doesn't matter. The point is that every NPC in that game is ultimately controlled by the person who's the god of that world. So even if some of those characters might have independent thoughts that Kane isn't controlling, he has the ability to just make them change their mind. And so likewise, I think that the Bobby Dots or VIP are elements of the Mimic. If you guys have ever played around with ChatGPT, you can be like, hey, pretend to be a guy named Frank who loves tacos, and then you say, hey, what are you doing? And ChatGPT will be like, I'm Frank and I love tacos. That doesn't mean that that's what ChatGPT actually is. It means it's capable of, like, compartmentalizing this character and then acting as that character. So everything in the pizzaplex is overall the Mimic, but that doesn't mean that any individual entity that you encounter has the full plan or has the full intentions or motivations or personality of the Mimic character that would hold the Tiger Rock plush and be, Dave and whatever. I don't know. I think that's just a weird quote to use right here.
Transforming into whatever shape it needs. But
he recoiled from the convulsive flow of the black cables that moved along with one. Looking at the black tail-like things streaming behind one, Abe felt like his apartment had been transformed into a nest of vipers. So yeah, these are just wires that are attacking him like snakes. Why can't this be controlled by the same AI that also has a robot body? Think about it like in other stories where robots turn evil and take over the world, right? Like Ultron from Age of Ultron. He goes in the internet. He's everywhere. Literally, they have to destroy him out of the internet to erase him. Every single robot you see in the Age of Ultron movie is controlled by Ultron. Destroying one doesn't destroy him. He does control all of them. He is all of them, but he also has a main core body. Saying that, the main body doesn't exist because he also exists in other forms, that's a very odd. I don't understand. It's just not how, AI, and I don't mean, generative AI in the way that we modernly use AI, I just mean artificial intelligence in general. It's not the way that computers work.
Ruin, we got this thing. An endo made up of the most random assortment of parts that walks with a limp. These two things don't feel like they're the same threatening creature, but
they don't need to be the same creature. One can be his body in the form of a robot that this overall, cloud AI controls, and the other can just be elements of the pizzaplex in general that AI is capable of controlling and moving and, like, attacking Abe. Like, what?
And we do consider the books to be canon, I think I might have an answer for this. By the end of the epilogues, the Mimic
It's not a
is
question.
destroyed, spring-locked by a jester costume. If the Mimic program wants to use this body, it would need to be repaired. Enter Vanessa, and thanks to GGY, likely Gregory, who can then use Glamrock Freddy to clear the path down into the depths, into the FNAF 6
where
building,
William's
and
body
to
is.
where the Mimic's destroyed body lies dormant. From here, they would do what we initially suspected Vanessa was doing with Burn Trap. They would repair him using a mix-mash of endoskeleton parts, anything they could find, in order to put it back together. That could be why we see it limping before the chase scene. It's either still partially damaged, or it's just because the parts aren't its own, but a random assortment that's not fully balanced or calibrated. That would then tie into the ending we got from the new Help Wanted 2 update. We see Mixes driven away in a van that looks suspiciously like the one Gregory drove in one of the security breach endings.
I'm always very skeptical of this kind of thing, just because, like, if you're going to draw a van, you're going to draw a van. It looks like that one has a red top part, whereas this one doesn't. We obviously only see the back in this and the front in that, but that doesn't have the same stripe. Like, could it be a cartoon representation of the same van? Yes. Could it also just be that that's what vans look like? Also, yes. I'm also very critical of the idea that this is the van taking the Mixus machine. Some people say, oh, it's taking it away from the pizzaplex. Some people are saying, oh, it's taking it to the pizzaplex. We don't know. All we know is that the Mixus machine was in a van at one point. This doesn't tell us one way or the other. I think, and this is really just a joke, I think that this is the van that hit and killed Dave. Think about it. Dave is haunting Mexus? Interesting. I think dramatic, conclusion to the story where Mexus has to look at the Mimic and be like, you're evil, you shouldn't be here. And he's like, I am evil because I learned hatred. And then he says, oh my god, but I am Dave, the boy you love. And he's like, oh, that is true, maybe I should be good again. And then they're like, we're best friends. And then they hold hands and they go and be like ghosts together or something. That's how I think the story is going. No, I don't hear anyone else talking about that.
Mixes wasn't always underneath FNAF 6. After the events of Security Breach, it seems like both Gregory and Vanessa have been freed from the Mimic's control. But they know what's down there. They put it back together, and because of that, they know how to stop it.
Are we thinking that now Gregory and Vanessa, who've escaped the Mimic's control, remember their time being controlled by the Mimic? Because it really seemed like when they were flip-flopping personalities, they didn't remember that.
Seeing in this ending could be Gregory and Vanessa driving Mixes to the pizzaplex, collecting it from...
You know what's crazy? Oh my gosh, this is
together, and because
guys,
of that, they know how to
I just
stop
uncovered,
it.
this is
What
insane.
we're seeing in this ending could be...
Okay, those dice on the mirror, 5 and 4, keep this in mind, 5 and 4 together, add those together, you get 9.
Gregory and Vanessa driving Mixes to
the front view, 3 and 5 makes 5. 9 plus 5 is 14. It's 14 theory, it's confirmed.
Pizzaplex, collecting it from the same place the Mimic.
This is serious, guys.
The MCM toy store and factory, Edwin's. That's why Gregory's backpack and walkie-talkie end up down with the Mimic, because they were installing Mixes to keep it locked away, only for the Mimic to learn Gregory's voice and trick Cassie into freeing it. What all of this amounts to is actually something we theorized a very long time ago about the future of this franchise, one that we've actually been quite disappointed hadn't seemed to have come to fruition since then. The soft reboot of the franchise.
How is it not a soft reboot if you believe the original games aren't canon anymore? What are you talking about?
Making Edwin canon to the games, and with the Mimic being the true identity behind Glitch Trap, it removes the parts both Afton and Henry played in our theories. We finally moved on from the original characters and story of Henry versus Afton, and into a new era of new characters like Vanessa, Gregory, Cassie, and the Mimic. The Steel Wool era of games still uses the same rules and world as before, but it's more about the knock-on effects of those old characters' actions, rather than their direct input.
So, I kind of agree with that, which is why I think that Princess Quest is about Vanessa and not Cassidy. I think that learning new information about the new characters is more something that the people telling the story, the Steel Wool people, would want to do, as opposed to just, rehashing backstories for other characters. It's also why I think that the tapes that we learn about Vanessa, oh, your parents are divorced, and, your mother may have, done something bad. I don't think that that's, learning about Elizabeth and Mrs. Afton. I think that's actually learning about Vanessa and what actually happened with her parents that led her to be the kind of person who could be easily taken over by an evil rabbit. With that said, I still think that it makes sense that the story is about the legacy of William and that the Mimic is mimicking like William's evil, that it wants his body to be it wants Springtrap or Scraptrap, whatever, to be the basis of its new body, because it kind of wants to like have William's energy in it.
That's great. Ultimate Custom Night felt like a great ending to the story. Now, in retrospect, if the books are canon, we can truly split the series up and treat this as a new era separate from those original stories.
It already was.
However, if Tales is canon, this isn't the only thing that changes. There's one more story, one more domino that has to fall, and the story is called Frailty. Here, we need to go...
A girl, and it might be connected to the story in Fred's fiction because it has the same heart-shaped necklace, maybe.
Jessica, who has a special metallic necklace that when she scrapes off shavings and puts them on dying patients at a hospital, they get better. At the end of the story, she uses the last of this necklace and becomes a pile of scrap metal. The powers of this necklace are nearly identical to the power we saw from the necklace given to Sarah by Eleanor in the story To Be Beautiful. Sarah was...
But, like, was it, though? Because it was pretty clear that Eleanor was literally tearing Sarah apart, and that the heart-shaped pendant just sort of let her keep the visage of looking human. Whereas, from the little quotes that they just had, it made it seem like maybe the remnant was, like, healing her? Like, it's very unclear. I would have to do, like, a very, very deep dive directly into both of these stories, into To Be Beautiful and to Frailty. I just don't think that they're necessarily confirming each other, that it's like the same pendant or the same thing. And even if they are very similar, that still just means that there are similar items across continuities. It does not tell us that they take place in the same continuity. So that's like saying that Funtime Freddy existing in the games and Funtime Freddy existing in Fazbear Frights means that they're the same Funtime Freddy. Like, no, it does not mean that. It also doesn't mean that the heart-shaped pendant that we see in the Into the Pit game means that the Into the Pit game takes place in the same continuity as the To Be Beautiful book. It's just not how that works.
Eventually turned into a pile of scrap metal, but while she wore the necklace, she appeared completely human. The reason that this is such a big deal is that To Be Beautiful isn't from Tales from the Pizzaplex.
It's from Frights, which would make Stitchline canon.
Frights, the previous collection of short stories. And if Eleanor becomes canonical, then at the very least, every story connected to her also becomes canonical. Agony would become canon. Time-traveling ball pits would be canon. And the Afton amalgamation, or the Agony, the thing everyone said Matt was insane for even suggesting to be part of the game's timeline, would indeed be canon. This idea, the fanbase has dubbed Stitchline games, because they all tie into the epilogues from those books surrounding a mysterious character called the stitchwraith. The stitchwraith is an endoskeleton that contains the souls of two...
I don't know why they chose to use Ennard's face for that. That seems very odd. It seems like it would be confusing to a casual fan who knows what Ennard is, but not what the stitchwraith looks like.
Children, Jake and Andrew. And Andrew is the more interesting one in terms of canonicity.
Because is he Cassidy? Oh my gosh.
As one of the 6 missing kids that were killed in 1985. Because of this, Andrew...
It's kind of crazy how this is only canon if Frailty is also canon, and if the books are canon and whatever, and yet we've still never heard about any of these characters in the game. You think that if this actually happened in the games, we would have literally heard anything about it and wouldn't have to go down this line of if the plush is in the games and the plush is in the books, and if the necklace is in the book and the necklace is in the other books and the characters in the books, that means he travels all the way to the games. It just doesn't work like that in any other franchise. I don't understand. FNAF is supposed to be FNAF fans, theorists, whatever, are people who love solving these puzzles and like putting together the narrative in this way where it comes together satisfactorily and they like following the clues. This would be an insane puzzle to put together in this way. I just don't understand why to anyone this seems like the more likely of the options, as opposed to they're different pendants, or they're different continuities, or the tiger plush in this and the tiger plush in this just aren't the same tiger plush. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Vengeful, even, to the point where in The Man in Room 1280, he keeps a burnt and dying Afton alive in a hospital just to torture him inside his mind. That sounds familiar,
like
almost as if it's exactly what happens in Ultimate Custom Night. A vengeful spirit torturing Afton for all eternity. For the longest time, we've attributed this role to Cassidy, the 5th missing kid, and a spirit possessing Golden Freddy. But if the Tales books are canon, which means that at least the stitchwraith stories are canon, that would mean that Andrew...
There was just such a weird leap that they just made. If the Tales books are canon, and the pendant from the Tales books are the same as the pendant from the Stitch line, then it means that. You skipped over that big linchpin that is so, like, I don't know if that really works, guys, to come to this, like, sweeping conclusion. It's just, I've always said, I think that the ramifications of something are proportional to the size of the hint that gives it. And I don't think the heart-shaped pendant, I don't even think it's described as heart-shaped in Frailty, it's just a pendant. I don't think that the existence of that in two different stories can be used, that tiny little detail can be used to say that Andrew is games canon. That's just such, like, there's just so many little, little choke points that you have to work past to get from all the way over here to all the way over here. I just think it's a very big leap. I think it's crazy.
Spirit is more likely the one torturing Afton. The man in room 1280 and Ultimate Custom Nights are happening at the same time.
Or they're different versions of the same events in different continuities.
Andrew is the vengeful spirit. I suppose that would explain why the one you should not have killed is referred to using male pronouns.
He's here
And always watching.
the one you shouldn't have killed.
The only confusing part is, why show us Golden Freddy for beating the hardest difficulty? In the story The New Kid, they do find a kid with black curly hair inside the Golden Freddy suit, which matches the description of Andrew's hair. But then, he's not shown to possess Golden Freddy in any of the stitchwraith stories. And in the Into the Pit game, we have a minigame that shows us an Andrew-possessed fetch, while Golden Freddy sits there with its eyes lit up, implying that Golden Freddy is already possessed and that it and Andrew are separate. Plus, what's with...
But even if you believe everything he said this entire time so far, why does that mean that you can look at the Into the Pit game for lore for the Into the Pit book? Like, it just doesn't work that way.
The 6 graves we have are Gabriel, Fritz, Susie, Jeremy, Cassidy, and Charlie. Did Andrew's parents just not love him enough to get him one? It does feel odd that this clearly very important character doesn't really appear in anything, and has largely been forgotten in all the clues given to us inside the games themselves.
Clues.
But then, I guess this is where the new games can come in. If Stitchline is canon, that would make the Into the Pit game canon, and Mega Cat...
No, it wouldn't! Excuse me? That would make the game not canon. And okay, this also kind of frustrates me when it comes to the books. I've heard people say, basically what he just said, I've also heard people say, since the game is canon, Into the Pit game is canon, because it's a game, that means that the Stitchline isn't canon, because the game's canon and the story's not, so the other stories aren't. I've also heard people say that because The Week Before is games canon, that means that Return to the Pit is games canon. Again, big leap. So if Return to the Pit is games canon, that means that the book Into the Pit isn't games canon, meaning the Stitchline isn't. So people are using the exact same logic of the Into the Pit game is canon, therefore the stories isn't. The interactive novels canon, therefore the stories aren't. Or either of them are, therefore the stories are, which is what he just said. Like, and everyone says it with the same level of confidence of, like, it is now confirmed that this happened because of, and then completely different evidence that contradicts each other. I would at least like if the people who use that logic, that evidence, to see that the people who are coming to the opposite conclusion using the same logic might mean that they're the one who's wrong. The people saying the Into the Pit game proves that the stories aren't canon, and the people who say that the Return to the Pit novel proves that the stories aren't canon, you need to look at each other and be like, oh, well, I think he's wrong, and he thinks I'm wrong, and we're using the exact same logic, so maybe I am the one who's wrong. I would very much like it if people did that.
Has already teased us with a Fetch sequel coming at some point.
Yes,
so details
which I would
like
love.
this could be more thoroughly explored in those future titles.
Or it's a teaser to that next game that they're working on and nothing more.
So actually, there's something quite satisfying about that. What that would essentially leave us with are 2 sets of games running side by side, the Mega Cat series and the Steel Wool series. One aimed at clarifying Andrew's story within the older games, and one aimed at exploring the future of the franchise's story. It all sounds so idyllic, doesn't it? It feels like a number of holes in the story do get filled in if the books are in fact canon.
But if the Mega Cat games would be telling the story of Andrew in the older games, that means the books aren't canon. And remember, he used the phrase one-to-one earlier in this video. If the Into the Pit game is canon, then the Into the Pit book isn't. So that means the books aren't canon. And if the books aren't canon, then you can't use the logic of the pendant existing in the 2 different books to be in the games. Like, it's a contradiction, my man.
The question is, do I really think they are? Now, I would be
I don't
remiss
know.
if I didn't talk about the other side of this canon coin just a little bit. While the appearance of a Tiger Rock plushie and Edwin's name on the sign do seem like compelling pieces of evidence towards the books being canon, there is a chance this is another Silver Eyes situation. In those books, we have William and Henry, but while they share a name with their in-game counterparts, they are decidedly different characters.
Obviously, it just makes sense for him to bring up the counterpoint. I don't know why you'd make a 20-minute long video. Like, I don't think his conclusion is going to be that they aren't. It might be that we don't know. I don't know why you'd make this 20-minute long video, because I think that the only thing that the general audience is going to come away with is, oh, this now has disproven this theory. And as a FNAF tuber, it's really annoying, because then people will come in the comment section of my videos and be like, actually, that cannot be true because the books are canon. Tom said so from game theory.
In the games, Afton gets spring-locked and locked.
Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, though. I love Tom. I love game theory.
In FNAF 3. While in the books, Afton survives his spring locking, isn't locked away, and goes on to pursue immortality. In the books, Henry unalives himself in 1985 when he can't take the grief of his daughter's death.
I really hate the phrase unalive. I think that it actually trivializes the concept of suicide, and if you're going to bring up the notion of someone taking their own life, you should actually use the word and not kidify it by using the word unalive. So I really don't like that.
While in the games, he sacrifices himself when burning down the FNAF 6 pizzeria, which is at least 30 years after the closure of Freddy's. Same characters, different stories. And so, there is a chance we're seeing the same thing happen here. Edwin definitely seems to exist in the main canon, but it may not be.
Edwin seems to exist in 5 Laps at Freddy's, which is not the main canon. But continue.
One-to-one with his book counterparts. Tiger Rock also seems to exist.
I think I just missed him saying may not be one-to-one. Yes, correct.
In the games and the books, but the story surrounding him and the Mimic might be slightly different.
Yes.
It's also worth noting that we were introduced to William Afton's name and Henry as a full character in the books first, and then later they showed up in the games, which is exactly what we've seen with the Mimic, a character that was introduced in the books first, then showed up in Ruin later. It's following a similar pattern. The truth is, either of these options is entirely possible. Right now, we just don't have enough.
I take back everything I've said. I'm going to delete this video and not even post it. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, well, I'm glad you said it.
To say one way or the other with complete certainty. We're just gonna have to wait for Secret of the Mimic to hopefully.
I just kind of wish that they had sort of started the video saying this. That they would have started the video saying, we don't know which one it is, but if it's this, let's go see what changes. Because I think that sort of guides the audience along better to follow what's actually going on. If you say it could just be parallels, or it could be totally canon, we don't know either way, but if it ends up being totally canon, let's see what changes. I think that would be a great starting point, as opposed to saying, let's see what changes if it is canon, and at the very end you pull back and say, but that might not even have been true, that whole thing we just watched might not even matter. It should be the other way. Come on, guys.
Learn more and get the answer. However, despite the existence...
This is before Tom got his copy of Return to the Pit.
...of these items not confirming the book's canonicity 100%, I will say that the more I worked on this episode, the more open I became to this possibility. Like I said at the start of this episode, last time I asked Scott for clarity, and it feels like that's what we're getting. So I'd be silly not...
We were always going to get that in the Secret of the Mimic. Like, duh, the next game will obviously clear up the stuff that happened before it.
To take it seriously. Plus, if the books weren't meant to be canon, then including a Tiger Rock plushie and Edwin's name is just sowing discord for the sake of it.
Yes, and I did bring that up earlier as what I think is the most compelling thing to be, that we are supposed to notice that, because why else would they be doing that?
Rather than actually trying to help clarify things.
Yes, I agree.
I know Scott is known for being a bit of a troll, but that feels extreme even for him. By including them while not completely confirming anything, it does feel like we're being pointed in that direction. And as we've talked about today, that could be really helpful for explaining the mess that was Security Breach, Vanessa's original plan, who is running the pizzaplex, and why the Mimic is different now than in the books. But I guess we're just going to have to wait and see when Secret of the Mimic comes out this year to know for sure.
Here's the thing, I don't think that Secret of the Mimic's really going to solve anything. I think it would be the next game after Secret of the Mimic that's going to bring the story to a conclusion. I said this on the live stream, the T-Dreads live stream a few days ago. I don't think that this is going to solve anything, because if it's very similar to the books, then some books people are going to be like, oh my god, see, the books are canon. And if there's literally any changes from the books, the anti-books people are going to be like, see, I told you it wasn't canon. It's not going to be until the story is concluded, which I think would happen in a theoretical follow-up to this, where like all the characters, you got your Vanessas and your Gregorys and your Cassies and now your Mimics, and they all meet up and they have a big final battle, right? Your pizza sims, the conclusion to the story arc. I don't think it'll be until after that when we can look back and be like, well, the books were canon. Because that's just how storytelling works.
Maybe on April 6th, 2025, if the 4625 code from the New Help Wanted ending is anything to go by.
Someone pointed out that might just be the date that the trailer comes out, which I think would be very disappointing. I hope that that's when the game comes out. I don't want to have to wait anymore, guys. Alright, so let's conclude this video now. So what did we learn? Nothing. I have the same opinion I did coming into the video that I do going out, which is that this does show that if the books aren't one-to-one with the games, that the games are closer than we had previously known, the Tiger plush exists. But it does not show one-to-one that the books are in the games, and it was never going to, so I'm glad that Tom didn't come to that conclusion. With that said, I think the video could have been structured differently to kind of guide the audience through it. I do like, and I do admit that I should have thought about this more myself, I do like that they looked back at their own theories and said, oh, I guess this one can't be true anymore, but I wish it was stated that way directly, of saying, we're going to look at episode 53 of Game Theory to see if that can happen, as opposed to, we're going to look at this nebulous theory that other people in the community might have and see how it's impacted by this evidence. Do I think it's a bad video? I think it could have been switched around a little to make it more coherent and to kind of leave like a better understanding of media literacy in the eyes of the people who are watching it. But I think it was fine. It was a good video. You did it, guys. This is me, the person with 50,000 subs, telling Game Theory that they did a good job. They definitely care about that kind of thing. I guess we'll see in the next couple days how people take this video. And I guess I'll see in the next couple days how people take this video. I'm sure people won't like it. I'm sure a very loud group of people won't like it. But hey, even if you didn't like it, if you still think I did a good job making the video, you can leave a like. You can then leave a comment saying why you don't agree with me. You can even give me money to tell me that you don't agree with me and want me to make more videos making a fool of myself. I have a Patreon. You can give me money. I'll make more bad videos for you to not like. Works for you, works for me, we all good. Works for Clifford, works for Toto. Genuinely, thank you guys for watching. This is going to come out to be like an hour long. I don't know who's watching this. Probably the same people who just watched that Game Theory video and now want to see other people react to it to see what their favorite YouTuber has to say. Again, thank you for watching. Please be nice to each other in the comments and everywhere else on the internet. I'm sure there's going to be fights on Twitter about this whole thing. Be sure to support the creators you admire. Don't lose sight of the things that are important to you. And remember that Freddy's stands for friendly, respectful engagement, discussion, discourse yields success.